A man stands outside a tomb, not to preach, not to perform a miracle, not to explain to the crowd why death is not the end. He stands there and he weeps. This is not a scene you expect from someone who, for days earlier, told his disciples, with complete calm, that everything was going to be fine. This is not what you picture when you think of the Son of God. And yet here he is, in the dirt and the grief and the smell of a village in mourning, with tears running down his face. The shortest verse in the English Bible has only 3 words: Jesus wept. Scholars have pointed to it, preachers have quoted it, children have memorized it in Sunday school. But almost nobody stops long enough to ask the question underneath it. Why? Why does the man who is about to raise Lazarus from the dead stand in front of that tomb and cry? Here is what we are going to do. We are going to look at every time the Gospels record Jesus weeping, and I mean really look down into the original Greek, into the cultural world of first century Judea, into the historical record outside the Bible. And by the time we are done, I think you will understand something about the character of God that you may have never seen this clearly before. Stay with me, because the answer is not what most people assume. The world Jesus walked in was not embarrassed by tears. You have to understand this because you probably live in a culture that is. Especially if you are a man. The idea that grief should be private, that weeping in public is weakness, that is a modern Western idea, and it would have been completely foreign to a Jewish family in Bethany in the first century. In that world, when someone died, you did not grieve alone. Professional mourners were hired. Neighbors came. The entire village participated. The Mishnah, the written collection of Jewish oral law, describes burial customs with specific instructions about how the community was to mourn together, loudly, visibly, without apology. Grief was communal. Tears were expected. So when you read the 11th chapter of John, you need to picture not a quiet graveside service with folded programs and soft organ music. You need to picture a crowd. Noise. Women weeping openly. Men standing with their heads down. The sound of a village that has lost one of its own. His name was Lazarus. He lived in Bethany, a small town on the eastern slope of the Mount of Olives, about 2 miles from Jerusalem. He had 2 sisters. Martha, the older one, the one who organized things and asked the hard questions, and Mary, the younger one, the one who, a few days later, would pour an entire jar of perfume over Jesus' feet and wipe them with her hair. These were not strangers. These were friends. John tells us plainly, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Not acquaintances. Not followers. Friends. The kind of people whose house you go to when you need to rest. The kind of people who know your face before you speak. And Lazarus was dead. 4 days dead. So dead that Martha would say with brutal honesty, "There is already a stench." Jesus received the message about Lazarus while he was on the other side of the Jordan River, 2 days away. And here is the part that always stops people cold when they actually read it. He waited. He did not rush. He did not leave immediately. He stayed where he was for 2 more days, and then he told his disciples it was time to go to Judea. The disciples were confused and a little afraid because the last time Jesus was near Jerusalem, people had tried to stone him. Thomas, the one history has unfairly nicknamed the Doubter, said something that sounds almost fatalistic. Let us also go that we may die with him. They did not understand what was about to happen. Neither did Martha. Neither did Mary. Neither did anyone standing in that courtyard in Bethany when Jesus finally arrived. Martha came out to meet him first. And what she said is one of the most theologically loaded sentences in the entire Gospel of John. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Read that again. Feel the weight of it. This is not an accusation, not quite. But it is not comfortable either. It is the prayer of someone who believed completely that Jesus could have prevented this, and is now standing in the ruins of that belief, trying to hold both things at once, her faith and her grief. Jesus answered her with one of the most extraordinary claims anyone has ever made in human history. I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And Martha, remarkable woman that she was, said yes. She confessed it. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God. And then she went and got her sister. Mary came quickly. She fell at his feet, the same posture she always took at his feet, the place of a student before a teacher. And she said the exact same words as Martha. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Same sentence. But something about Mary saying it broke something open. John tells us that when Jesus saw her weeping, and the crowd weeping with her, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. Now here's what most people miss. The Greek word there, embrameomai, is not a gentle word. It does not mean he felt a little sad. It carries the idea of deep agitation, of something moving with force inside a person. Some scholars translate it as deeply moved in his spirit. Others say it is closer to anger, not at Mary, not at the mourners, but at something larger. At death itself. At the fact that the people he loved were standing in the ruins of loss and there was nothing in the human toolkit that could fix it. He asked where they had laid him. "Lord, come and see," they said. And then, two Greek words that changed everything about how we understand God. Edakrysen ho isis. Jesus wept. Not eklasen. That word means to wail, to sob audibly, the way a mother cries when she gets the phone call no parent should ever receive. That word comes later in this story, in a different city for a different reason. Here, in front of this tomb, in this village, the word is quieter. Edakrysen. Tears. Silent tears, running down the face of someone who is standing in the full weight of human sorrow. The crowd saw it. And they said, and I want you to hear how simple this is, see how he loved him. Not see how powerful he is. Not see how divine he is. They looked at the tears on his face and they said, look how much he loved that man. But there were others in the crowd who said something else. Something colder. Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? It is a fair question. It is your question, if you have ever lost someone and wondered where God was. It is Martha's question with the warmth stripped out. And Jesus did not answer it with words. He answered it with action. Take away the stone, he said. Now we need to leave Bethany. We need to walk 2 miles west, up the slope of the Mount of Olives, to a moment that happened just days before the crucifixion. Because the second time Jesus wept, it was not over a friend. It was not over a grave. It was over a city. And this time the word is different. Pull back the camera. It is what scholars call the triumphal entry. Palm Sunday, the day the crowd laid branches on the road and shouted Hosanna, and for one brief, shining moment it looked like everything was going to be different. Jesus is riding a donkey down the western slope of the Mount of Olives. The city of Jerusalem spreads out before him. The white limestone walls catching the morning light, the Temple Mount rising above everything else, the gold of the temple facade visible from miles away. Josephus, the Jewish historian who witnessed Jerusalem in its final days, described the temple as looking from a distance like a mountain of snow capped with gold. That is what Jesus is looking at. The crowd is cheering. The disciples are celebrating. And Jesus stops. And he weeps over the city. The 19th chapter of Luke, verse 41. And when he drew near and saw the city, he wept over it. Here is where the Greek matters enormously. Because this is not edakrysen, the quiet tears at the tomb of a friend. This is eklasen. This is the word for audible grief. Loud grief. The kind of crying you cannot control that comes up from somewhere below language, the way a person cries at a funeral when the casket is finally lowered and the reality of it becomes undeniable. The crowd is shouting Hosanna. And Jesus is sobbing. Nobody in that crowd understood what they were looking at. Here's what most people miss about this moment. Jesus was not weeping because things were going badly. He was weeping because he knew exactly how well things were about to go, and exactly what that would cost, and exactly what would happen to this city 40 years later when the bill came due. He spoke through his tears. Luke records the words. If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. Those words are not poetry. They are a military description. Precise. Specific. And in AD 70, approximately 40 years after Jesus spoke them on that hillside, the Roman general Titus besieged Jerusalem with exactly the tactics Jesus described. Josephus was there. He recorded it in exhaustive, horrifying detail in the Jewish war. The embankment built around the city walls, the starvation inside, the final assault, the temple destroyed so completely that soldiers pried the stones apart to retrieve the melted gold from the fires. Over 1 million people died. The city Jesus was looking at, glittering in the morning light on Palm Sunday, was 40 years from becoming rubble. And he knew. That is what the tears were about. You have to sit with that for a moment, because this is not the weeping of someone who is powerless. This is not grief born of surprise. Jesus is not crying because he did not see this coming. He is crying because he did. He is crying because he is looking at a city full of people he loves, people who are at this very moment throwing palm branches at his feet and singing, and he can see past the celebration to the catastrophe. He can see the gap between what this moment could mean and what it is actually going to become. This is the grief of a parent watching a child make a choice they cannot stop. You know this feeling if you have ever loved someone who was walking toward something that was going to hurt them, and you could not override their freedom to walk there. That helplessness is not weakness. It is love with its hands open. Pay attention to this, because here the pattern becomes visible. This is not a God who loves you from a safe distance. This is not a God who observes your suffering with detached compassion. This is not a God who has pre-approved your pain from a comfortable position above it all. Every time Jesus wept, he was fully inside the moment, fully present, fully feeling, refusing to hold himself at a distance from human pain even when he had the power to end it. At Lazarus's tomb, he could have stayed calm. He knew what was about to happen. He knew in 60 seconds he was going to call a dead man out of a cave. But he did not manage his emotions from a position of foreknowledge. He stood in the grief of the people around him and he let it land. On the Mount of Olives, he could have looked at Jerusalem the way a general looks at a map, strategically, analytically, with professional distance. Instead he sobbed. Loudly. In front of everyone. 2 tears. 2 completely different Greek words. 2 completely different situations. And the same thing underneath both of them. He refuses to not feel it. Now we go somewhere darker. Not a tomb in Bethany. Not a hillside in the morning light with crowds and palm branches. We go to a garden at night in the hours before an arrest, in the final stretch of a life that is about to end in the worst way the Roman Empire knew how to end a life. The Garden of Gethsemane. The name in Aramaic means oil press. It is a fitting name for what happens there. Most people know the broad outline. Jesus prays. The disciples fall asleep. Judas arrives with soldiers. The arrest happens. But there is a passage in the New Testament that most people walk past without stopping. A single verse in the book of Hebrews that describes what happened in that garden in terms so raw, so specific, so physically visceral that it stops you cold when you finally read it carefully. Hebrews chapter 5, verse 7. During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverent submission. Read that slowly. Fervent cries. Tears. To the one who could save him from death. The Greek here is krauge ischyra. Strong crying. Loud crying. Not the quiet tears of edakrysen. Not even the audible grief of eklasen on the Mount of Olives. This is something beyond both of those. This is a person crying out with everything they have, the way you cry when you are completely alone and there is no performance left in you, when the gap between what you are facing and what you can bear has become so wide that the only thing left is to make noise in the direction of God and hope he hears. And here is the thing that should stop you completely. This is Jesus. Not a disciple struggling with doubt. Not a psalmist in the middle of a dark night. This is the Son of God on his knees in an olive garden, crying out loud with tears running down his face, asking the Father to find another way. Augustine wrestled with this passage for years. In his tractates on the Gospel of John, he writes about the genuine humanity of Christ, the idea that the incarnation was not a performance, not God wearing a human costume and pretending to feel things. Augustine insists that the tears of Jesus are real tears, that the fear in Gethsemane is real fear, that the cry from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" is a real cry from a real person in real agony. God did not send a representative to suffer on our behalf. He came himself. And in Gethsemane, the full weight of what that meant pressed down on him like an oil press on olives, and he cried out. Now watch what happens next. Because Hebrews chapter 5, verse 7 ends with a phrase that is easy to rush past. And he was heard. He was heard. He asked to be saved from death. He was not saved from death, not in the way the prayer might have seemed to request. He went to the cross. He died. And yet the writer of Hebrews says he was heard. Because the Father's answer was not to remove the cup. The Father's answer was resurrection. Not escape from death. Passage through it. This is the third weeping. And it is the one that resolves everything. Go back to the question from the beginning of this video. Why does the man who is about to raise Lazarus from the dead stand in front of that tomb and cry? Why does the God who knows the end of every story weep on a hillside over a city he could theoretically protect? Why does the one who holds the universe together end up on his knees in a garden, crying out loud into the dark? Here is the answer. Because he chose to. Not because he had to. Not because the grief overwhelmed his divine nature and broke through against his will. He chose to enter human experience so completely, so without reservation, that he did not exempt himself from a single part of it. Not hunger. Not exhaustion. Not loneliness. Not grief. Not fear. Not tears. The incarnation was not God dipping a toe into human experience from a safe distance. It was God diving in. All the way. To the bottom. And the tears, all three of them, edakrysen and eklasen and krauge ischyra, are not signs of weakness. They are signs of the most radical kind of solidarity the universe has ever seen. They are God saying with his body what he had said with words 1,000 times before. I am with you. Not above you. Not watching from a distance. With you. In the dirt and the grief and the garden and the dark. This is not a story about a God who cries because he cannot help it. This is a story about a God who cries because he refuses not to. So let us bring this home. 3 moments. 3 different Greek words. 3 completely different circumstances. And one thread running through all of them that you cannot miss once you see it. Jesus did not manage his grief from a distance. He did not perform sadness for the benefit of the crowd. He did not hold himself together because it was expected of him or because showing emotion would undermine his authority. Every single time, he felt what the moment required. Fully, without apology, without restraint. And I want to give you 3 things to carry with you after this video is done. The first is this. Your grief does not embarrass God. Whatever you are carrying right now, whatever loss, whatever unanswered prayer, whatever tomb you are standing in front of asking why, you are not asking a God who is unmoved by it. You are asking the God who stood in front of a tomb in Bethany and cried, who sat on a hillside over a city he loved and sobbed loud enough for the crowd to hear, who knelt in a garden in the dark and cried out with everything he had. Your pain does not make him uncomfortable. It does not make him impatient. He has been here. Not metaphorically. Literally. In a body with tears in the dirt. The second thing is harder. God's answer to your pain is not always removal. Martha wanted Lazarus back. Jesus gave her that, but only after 4 days of grief that felt, I am sure, completely unnecessary if you believed Jesus could have prevented it. The people of Jerusalem needed peace. Jesus wept because they were going to choose a path that led to destruction, and he could not override their freedom to do it. In Gethsemane, Jesus asked for another way. There was not another way. Not one that accomplished what needed to be accomplished. The answer was not escape. The answer was resurrection on the other side of the thing he feared most. Sometimes God does not remove the stone. Sometimes he calls you out of the tomb after 4 days. And the 4 days are real. The grief inside them is real. He is not asking you to pretend otherwise. The third takeaway is the one I want you to sit with longest. The shortest verse in the Bible is also the most complete picture of God's heart we have ever been given. 3 words. 2 Greek words in the original. 1 sentence that took John less than a second to write and has taken theologians 2,000 years to fully reckon with. Jesus wept. Not Jesus observed the mourners with compassion. Not Jesus noted the grief of those present. Not Jesus, moved by the situation, expressed appropriate emotion. Jesus wept. He stood in the worst moment of people he loved, and he let it break him open, and he cried. And then he called a dead man out of a cave. And then he rode into a city he knew was going to kill him, and he wept over it anyway. And then he knelt in a garden and cried out into the dark, and he got up and walked toward the cross. Which of these 3 moments hit you the hardest? The tomb, the city, or the garden? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. If this video meant something to you, the single best thing you can do right now is share it with one person who needs to hear it. Not subscribe, though that helps too, but share it. There is someone in your life who is standing in front of a tomb right now asking where God is. Send them this. That is all. And if you want to go deeper, the next video in this series looks at every time Jesus said, "I tell you the truth." Amen, amen, lego hymen in the Greek, and what it reveals about the way he spoke with an authority that left rooms completely silent. It is linked right here. I will see you there. This is not a God who loves you from a comfortable distance. This is a God who loved you all the way to the bottom.